Hi folks, it's Evo here from Thundermist Lure Company, and welcome to today's episode of Thundermist Fishing Tips. You know, I thought I'd take a minute for the boatless angler who's fishing from shore, who wants to use lures. And sometimes, folks, it can be a little bit challenging if you're on the shoreline wanting to cast lures. So today we're going to talk about a few tips that are going to help make it a little bit easier for the boatless angler. So first thing, let's just talk quickly about rods. I think you all know the longer the rod, the longer the cast you're going to get. And when you're fishing from shore, sometimes it's very important to get out there a little bit further. When you're in a boat, you can fish where you want. From shore, you're limited. But for today, I've got a 6.5 foot rod. 7 foot, 7.5 foot, you're going to get longer casts. The other thing I like to do is, before I cast, I like to have about 2 feet of line running to my lure. And that gives me just enough leverage to make a cast and get a good distance out there. 2.5 feet. Even 2.5 feet would be okay. Now, when it comes to, let's talk about crankbaits first. We'll talk about spoons in a second. But when it comes to a crankbait, what you want to do is put on a snap, a single snap. And the reason for that, folks, is that snap is going to allow the lure to work to its maximum ability. It's going to give it the maximum amount of wobble. And all you need is a single snap. Now, what size snap do you use? Well, quite simply, the first thing I do, folks, is I match up the size of the snap to the size of the lure. You want something that's going to match and look good. So in other words, if you've got a small lure, you don't want to put a great big snap on. So in this case, I've got a size 2 snap on this smaller crankbait. I could use a size 1 or a size 2, and they would both look good. Now, once I've got the looks out of the way, then I look at the strength. So, for example, a size 3 snap is rated at 45 kilos. That's over 90 pound strength, so that's plenty. So I would look at the size first, then look at the rating, and then make my decision. So for here, a size 1 or a size 2 is perfect. And for that matter, folks, for most of your crankbaits, this is a little 2-inch one, 3.5 inch. Your size 1, 2, 3, those are your bread and butter sizes. The larger ones are more for your bigger lures and getting into more saltwater or big game fishing. And then, of course, we've got some small crankbaits that you could use for crappies and panfish. And with those small crankbaits, you're going to want to use a size 000, 00, or 0. And in fact, you know, they're plenty strong. The size 0 is such a small snap, but it's rated for like 25 kilos, over 50 pounds, which is very, very strong. So, once you've got your snap and your crankbait on, next thing you want to do now, when you're casting from shore for the boatless angler, most crankbaits typically float. This one is a floating one. Some of them do sink, but most of them float. So, again, cast it out as far as you can. Once it hits the water, first thing you want to do is point your rod tip down. Point your rod tip down and start cranking. And the reason you want to point your rod tip down is because you want that lure to start diving right away and get down to its maximum depth. And then crank it in, and when you're about, I'm going to say halfway in, you're starting to get closer to shore, and typically what happens, you know, it gets deeper, it gets shallower as you get closer to shore. So when you're about halfway in, just raise your rod tip up about halfway. So it's basically level to the water surface. And then when you get about the last quarter of the way, just raise your rod tip up, because you don't want to catch any of the rocks and the debris that are here. So very, very simply, once again, folks, cast it out, rod tip down, start cranking, crank, and then at about halfway down, I'm going to start, it's about halfway in, I'm just going to raise my rod tip up, and then when it comes really close here, I'm just going to raise it up even higher, because I don't want to get caught on the rocks right here and get snagged up. So that's a very, very easy way to work your crankbaits from the shoreline very, very effectively. Now let's take a look at a spoon. Okay folks, the other beautiful thing about a snap is it's really, really easy to snap off one lure and snap on another one. And what I have here now, folks, is I just grabbed myself a 3/4 ounce python darter, rigged it with a small little curly tail worm. And now the difference with the spoon is, this is a sinking lure as opposed to the crankbait that was floating. So these you work just a little bit differently. Cast it out like you would, except instead of starting to crank right away, what you want to do here is you want to wait and count 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and what you want to do is once you feel you're close to the bottom, or in fact, if you let it wait, you could watch your line and you could see when you actually hit the bottom, you count how many seconds it took to hit the bottom. So if it took 10 seconds, what you're going to want to do next time is cast it out, wait about 8 seconds, and then start your retrieve. And again, you're going to point your rod tip down, but here when you're working spoons, because they're weighted and there's no lip on them, they're not diving. So basically all it's doing is it's basically coming straight in. So you want to keep your rod tip down again and start cranking in towards the shoreline. And that will keep your spoon in the strike zone for the longest period of time. So once again, I'm just going to cast it out, let it get down there, count it down to when to where you want to be. Now it's close to the bottom. I'm going to just start cranking and keep the rod tip pointed down, and that'll keep your spoon basically always in the strike zone and give you more opportunity to get more bites. And again, you could do this basically right up to the shoreline, and away you go. And for any weighted spoons, any spoon at all, it doesn't have to be the Python darter, but any spoon at all, or if you're using a spinner bait or an inline spinner, anything that's weighted, cast it out, count it down, point the rod tip down, and start your retrieve. And for that matter, if I was using a spinner bait, I would also use a snap. I basically use a single snap for 90% of all my lures. As long as they're not spinning, I use a single snap. And I get a lot of people writing and asking us about snaps. I'll put a link in the description below if you're looking for snaps, and a variety of sizes of snaps that will come in handy for you. But that's basically it, folks. So there's some few simple techniques that hopefully will give you, as the boatless angler, when you're fishing from shore, a little bit of the edge, keep you in the strike zone longer, and put you on to more fish. So thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of Thundermist Fishing Tips. And as always, folks, until next time, good luck and good fishing. I think I'll take a few more casts. And it's much, much better to work your way up the rod and put your hand up just a little further. And one of the classic ways is right in the middle of, just open up your fingers right in the middle of your hand